We read in this week's Torah portion a very interesting commandment, and that is when we built the temple, so there was an altar, a mizbeach. The mizbeach, the altar, should have a ramp, and it should not have steps. Lo ta'ale b'ma'alot al mizbechi, you shouldn't have steps. Why? So Rashi explains, commentary explains, because if you have steps, it's going to embarrass the steps. You see, when you have steps, so a person has to go up, 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 and it's kind of, his steps are much harsher, much harder as if there was a ramp. If there's a ramp, his steps are small steps, and it's not embarrassing to the rocks, to the stones. And the question is, stones don't have feelings. They don't feel. So why on earth would we learn that you shouldn't be embarrassed from this idea? And the answer is, this is to teach us about human beings, that we shouldn't embarrass each other. If the Torah was so stringent with stone to make us build a ramp instead of steps so that it should embarrass the stones, how much more so should we be careful with each other's feelings? One of the worst things we do, especially in a case where you have WhatsApp all the time. You just send out WhatsApp, send out messages all the time. We have to be so careful not to embarrass another person, for the dignity and the honor of another person. They tell the story of the famous Chafetz Chaim. That one time he came to a certain village, and there was somebody, Yankel was supposed to host the Chafetz Chaim, and he was so excited, and him and his wife, they were preparing their bed, and his bed, and they were preparing the food, and they were very, very excited to host the Chafetz Chaim. Anyway, they come to the Friday night dinner table, and Yankel sees that he's about to make Kiddush, but his wife forgot to cover the challah. When we make Kiddush, the challah is supposed to be covered. So he was so embarrassed, he was so mortified that the Chafetz Chaim shouldn't think badly of him, that he screamed at his wife. He says, "Wife, why didn't you cover the challah? You're supposed to cover the challah." And his wife was so embarrassed, she was mortified. Here's the Chafetz Chaim, they're hosting the famous Chafetz Chaim. They were so careful that everything should be exact, and here they made a mistake. She made a mistake. She was embarrassed. So the Chafetz Chaim turned to Yankel and he said, "Do you know, Rabbi Yankel, why we are supposed to cover the challah?" And he said, "Sure. It's that we shouldn't embarrass the challah. We make Kiddush on the wine, but the challah is more important. Why don't we do the challah first? It's in order that the challah shouldn't be embarrassed, so we cover over the challah while we make the wine, and then we do the challah." So the Chafetz Chaim said, "Yes, the challah we are so careful with, not to embarrass it. That's to teach us that we shouldn't embarrass our wives, our spouses. Sometimes we embarrass the ones that are so close to us. Our children, our wives, our brothers, our sisters, our parents. Those are the ones we have to be extra careful with. And that's the lesson from the challah. So what's the point of screaming at your wife to cover the challah when the whole purpose of covering the challah is not to embarrass anybody, including your wife?" But the question is, why do we learn that you shouldn't embarrass another person from the ramp on the altar? Why don't we learn it from a much better story? You see, the Torah tells the story of Yehuda, brother number 4 of the 12 tribes, Yehuda. He married a woman and he had 3 children, Onah, and Shelah. Married a beautiful, beautiful girl. Her name was Tamar. He didn't want to impregnate her, and so in marital relations he pulled out at the last second, spilled his seed, which is a crime punishable by death, and God killed him. When your brother dies without children, you have a mitzvah called Yibum to marry his wife. So Onah, the next child, married Tamar, and he couldn't believe his luck. Such a beautiful, gorgeous girl. She was exceptionally beautiful. He married her, and he did the same sin. He spilled his seed, and God killed him too. So Yehuda didn't want the third child, Shelah, to marry Tamar. He didn't know why his children are dying. He just knows that, there seems to be something wrong with the wife. So he waited. After a few months, Tamar sees that her father-in-law is not giving the child to her to marry, and she realizes that she thinks it's her fault. He thinks it's her fault. So she waited for him on the side of the road. She dressed up like a prostitute. He didn't realize who she was, and he was very, very tempted to be with her, and he had relations with her. And in those days, that was considered marriage, right? Today we have to do a chuppah, we have to do a ketubah, we have to do a ring, we have to do a whole thing. In those days, you married a woman, you had relations with her, and that was marriage. So he married her. But he didn't know who she was, and he wanted to send 2 goats to her, and he couldn't find her. Anyway, he let the story be. He didn't know who he had relations with. 3 months later, rumor spreads in town that Tamar is pregnant. Now, Yehuda was the chief rabbi of the town. He was a very, very big rabbi. So he said she has to be put to death, because obviously she's pregnant. Obviously she had relations with somebody outside of the marriage. Kill her. Put her in the fire. As she was being led to the fire, as she was about to die, she sent a message to Yehuda. And she said, because Yehuda gave her, when he had relations, he sent her his private signet, his ring, his stick. So she sent a message to him, the owner of these 3 items, that is the person who is the father of my child. And Yehuda at that moment had an aha moment. He realized, oh my God, she's 100% right, and I'm 100% wrong. And he could have at that moment taken a little bit of whiskey, a little l'chaim, gone to bed, and she would have been burnt, and nobody would have realized that he was wrong. Now, why didn't Tamar come out, announce in public she actually had the proof that she was right? Because she said, it's better to be burnt in a furnace than to embarrass somebody. So she gave Yehuda the option. She said, you have the option now, do whatever you want with it. Here's the proof. And Yehuda, at that moment, he actually became a leader. At that moment, he defined what it means to be a true leader. And he came out in public and he said, I am wrong and she is right, publicly. And he married her, and she was pregnant with 2 children who became the forebringers of Mashiach and King David, etc., etc. But why don't we learn that you're not allowed to embarrass somebody from this story? Instead of learning it from the story of the altar which had a ramp instead of stairs, learn it from this story of Tamar. It's better to throw yourself into a furnace than to embarrass somebody else. And the Rebbe explains, you see, sometimes when we send out a message, a WhatsApp, and we embarrass somebody, and we are confronted, the person we embarrass says, why do you embarrass me? And we answer, were you really embarrassed from such a thing? Did you really get insulted from that? I didn't really intend to insult you. You know, we always have excuses. When we do something wrong, we always have an excuse for our behavior. When somebody else does something wrong to us, by nature, we're like upset. Imagine somebody double parks in New York in front of you. You go crazy. How dare you double park? When I'm double parked and somebody else is hooting behind me, I'm like, dude, 30 more seconds. I'm just picking up somebody. I'm just waiting for my wife or my kids. That's how we are naturally. See, in order to tell us that there's zero excuse, that there can be never can you disrespect another person, never can you embarrass somebody, we learn it from the stones. The stones, there's no excuse. There's nothing you can say about the stones. You know, by Tamar, by a human being, you could always excuse your behavior. You know, I did it because of this, that, the other. But by stones, the Torah teaches us that stones are not embarrassed. They're never embarrassed. What do you mean? And yet the Torah says, don't embarrass them, because there's never, ever an excuse. Because the greatest thing is a fellow Jew. He's your brother, he's your sister, she's your sister. They're your family. Never ever embarrass somebody, because their honor is God's honor, because they are children of God. You know, the story is told of the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe. Whenever he would daven mincha in 770 Eastern Parkway, so during the repetition of the Amidah, he would always have his hand like this, and his siddur was like on his lap, and he was like following along the words of the cantor. Every time, this was his custom. One day, the students noticed that the Rebbe wasn't going like this. He was sitting up like this, looking at his siddur. He wasn't doing like that. And the next day, he was back to going like this. And the next day, back to going like this. But the third day, he was like this. He wouldn't go down. And they noticed, they didn't realize. Some days the Rebbe was going down according to his custom. And some days he was like staying like this. And they had no idea what's going on until one smart student realized there was a pattern here. You see, every single time, at that time, there was a man who had come to Crown Heights. And he would sometimes daven mincha by the Rebbe. And that man was blind. And his face was like so ugly. He had a deformity. It was like he had boils on his face. And it was some terrible thing that had happened to him. Every single time that man, whose name was Shimon, was there, the Rebbe would never go like this according to his custom. He would always go like this, so as not to embarrass that person. Many people, students, couldn't be around him. He was just ugly to look at. And even though he was blind, the Rebbe wanted to teach a lesson. Never, ever embarrass another person. So the Rebbe deviated from his custom of going like this. And he went like this. So that that person shouldn't think that he was somehow embarrassing him, even though he couldn't even see him. To teach us how important it is we have to be with the honor and respect of another person. They tell the story of the Rebbe from Rimenov. You know, it was during Slichot, where you wake up early every single morning, you go say Slichot, and you pray for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur. And one time there was a new guy in town, and he realized the Rebbe from Ribenov didn't attend Slichot. Where was he? So the students of the Rebbe told him, the Rebbe's probably in the worlds of Atzilus, like in the spiritual realms, in the spiritual worlds. He's probably, praying. I don't know what he's doing. Anyway, this newcomer thought the Rebbe's probably sleeping late. That's really what's happening. So he decided to follow him. He woke up early the next morning, waited outside the Rebbe's house and looked by the window, see what the Rebbe's doing. And he noticed that the Rebbe's waking up very, 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 very early. The Rebbe goes out, and he's following him from a distance, and he sees the Rebbe go to the forest. And he's chopping down wood. He thought, this is strange, why is he chopping wood? And he follows him. From chopping wood, he follows him until he comes to a certain house, and he watches. The Rebbe goes inside the house, and there was a woman there who had just given birth. And he asked her, do you need any wood? And she said, yes, I do, but I can't pay. The Rebbe said, don't worry. The Rebbe was dressed as a peasant, so she couldn't recognize him. And he sees how the Rebbe lights a fire for her, and he makes her breakfast, and he makes her food, and he puts it all on the table for her. And only after the house was warm and he made her breakfast did he leave and did he go to shul. And the students after asked this guy, did you see where the Rebbe was? Was he in the spiritual worlds? And the guy said he was much higher. He was in the highest levels. Because the greatest thing you can do, higher than any spiritual level, is to help a fellow Jew. Give him breakfast, give him charity, give him what he needs. It's the greatest thing you can possibly accomplish on planet Earth. It's the greatest merit. You know what a father loves more than anything else? When his children get along. You know what God loves more than anything else? When us Jews get along one with the other, when we honor and respect one another, and we're not embarrassing one another. That is the greatest gift we could possibly give God. And that's the lesson from this week's Parsha. We build not steps, we build a ramp, not to embarrass the stones, to teach us. If the Torah is so into the respect of the stones, how much more so should we honor and respect each other? Enjoy.